Hello, and shalom to my brothers and sisters in Master Yeshua the Messiah who have his testimony and guard his commandments. Brother Nicholas James Vanderlane, and today is the 17th day of the second month on Yahweh Elohim's solar calibrated non-Gregorian 364-day calendar of the Dead Sea Scrolls, First Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, the Torah, and the Prophets. It's May 6th, 2023. This video is being recorded and published from Aqaba, Jordan. And this video is about Karajadog, the Garden of Eden. In this video, I will present my process of discovering the Garden of Eden as Karajadog that I discovered on December 11th through 12th, 2022, and becoming the second multiple discoverer of Karajadog as the Garden of Eden. So as you can see, here is my screenshot of my 364-day calendar that I publish. The solar calibrated non-Gregorian calendar. Today's the 17th day of the second month. It's May 6th. And you can see here today that today is the day that Adam and Eve sinned. They ate of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And then Yahweh, he made coats of animal skins. And it's not mentioned in the Bible, but that's called atonement. He made a covering for them, a kippurim, a covering for them. And if he made it out of skins, animal skins, then animals would have died, which means that those animals would have been offered as a burnt offering sacrifice. Thus, Yahweh Elohim made vicarious atonement for mankind as his first act after the fall of mankind. That was a sign of what's to come of the righteousness of the blood of Messiah Yeshua, the Lamb of Elohim, that take away the sin of the world. Prior to the covering being made, there were curses put on Adam and Eve as a penalty for their sin. Put the curses on them of the thorns and the thistles on Adam, and then the pain and childbearing for Eve, and a couple other things. And then between Eve's seed and the serpent's seed. And then Adam and Eve were exiled that day on the 17th day of the second month from the Garden of Eden. Interesting also on this day is was the first day of the flood judgment, when it rained 40 days and 40 nights, the flood of Noah. I am aware that the Greek Septuagint says the 27th day of the second month, but in Dead Sea Scroll 4Q252, it also says that the flood began on the 17th day of the second month, and that was somebody's understanding that they did regarding the whole flood timeline, so that's something to consider. And then also on this day, after 364 days in the year, Noah departed, got off the ark, and that was the last day of the year. So if you don't know about the 364-day calendar, check out my other work on it. It's a 364-day calendar on a 365.25-day solar cycle. So if you aren't familiar with this video that I just published an hour ago, it's about an hour and 42 minutes long, filmed it last night, edited it today, just published it an hour ago. You need to watch this first. It's about Noah's Ark mountain, Karajadog, and how I discovered it using the Dead Sea Scrolls, because it is also Mount Karajadog. And what I am said in that video and what I'm saying now is that Noah, he landed in the Garden of Eden, and he actually deciphered it in his text in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and we can use DNA fingerprinting to prove that. And there's also other information out there that I'm going to use in this presentation to prove it. If you haven't seen my video on Noah's Ark and the mountain of Noah's Ark with the Dead Sea Scrolls, you need to watch that video first, because there's information in there that's going to carry over into this video now. So, like I just mentioned, I made a double discovery, a dual discovery, and that happened on December 11th, 2022. After walking through Karajadog, on the top of Karajadog for about a week, through Karajadog Mountain's barren landscape, it was full of thorn plants right here and thistle plants. And as I was exploring the mountain for evidence of Noah's post-flood life on the mountain, I had an epiphany that these thorns right here, plants, and these thistle plants are the curse, the literal curse that came upon the ground after Adam's sin. To correct myself and give the most accurate account, I noticed the thorns and thistles and the fulfillment of Genesis 3:18 and 19 on Karajadog a day earlier on December 10th, 2022, at the end of the day after exploring the huge terraces. Here's my WhatsApp message I sent to Ken Griffith at around 10 p.m. at night on December 10th. I went to some of the most defined terraces, but went late in the day Do you notice or remember the two most abundant plants? Genesis 3:18 to 19. Thorns and thistles shalt bring forth to thee, and thou shalt eat the herb of the field, in the sweat of thy face thou shalt eat bread. Thorns, thistles, and einkorn wheat. Bread. So real quick, regarding the herb of the field right here. So you would have to gather the herb of the field, which are legumes. In my previous presentation, I state that the chickpea and bitter vetch are legumes that are actually herbs, herb-yielding seed, and that's what they would eat for food, the herb-yielding seed. So they would have to go through all and collect out the herb-yielding seed through all the thorn bushes and everything else. Ken would not respond or address my discovery of the thorns and thistles on Karajadog on December 10th. He would later do it after I send him a follow-up second question on the night of December 11th, which was actually postmarked for December 12th. So the following day, I would go back, and that's when I recorded the following video footage. And here's some videos of me and that I filmed that day while we're out filming the vineyard of my finding this and identifying this. It was absolutely amazing. In Genesis chapter 3, verse 18 and 19, Adam's curse would be thorns and thistles, and that I think by the sweat of his brow that he would have to eat bread, which is a grain. Wheat. So what we have here on Karajadog is we have two different types of thorns. Okay, a thorn bush. So you have two different types of plants here that are the main vegetation here on Karajadog. Okay, we have these thistle plants. These are thistles. That's definitely thistle plant. So here is the curse that was on Adam. You have the thorn bushes right here. Thorn bushes. You have a thorn weed type thing right here. Here's a thorn weed. Then you have the thistle plant right here with the red soil, the aduma right here, the red soil. And this is the location of the birthplace of einkorn wheat. Domesticated einkorn wheat. And wild einkorn wheat is natural here. HallelwYAH. What you just saw was me identifying the curse on Adam. And here is a conversation that I had late night on December 12th, 2022. So that evening when I came back from filming at the mountain, or that night, I should say, or early morning, now the next Gregorian calendar day, I shared my findings of the thorns and thistles, and that I was working on a fresh hypothesis relating Karajadog Mountain to Adam and Eden with Ken Griffith, who is a mutual, independent, multiple discoverer of Karajadog as the mountain of Noah. So here is my WhatsApp messages I shared with him. And in it, on December 12th, around 1:45 a.m., I sent him this message. Also, and this, I'm in Türkiye at this time, and he's back in the States. So I sent him a message, so it was a lot earlier for him. Also, I documented on several locations the main foliage. There is thistle plants among the thorn plants. Everything described in Adam's punishment. If you can't tell, I'm working on a hypothesis, ... Then I talk about the scale of the vineyard that I filmed that day. And then I send him a message that I ask him, is there a chance that Adam went to Karajadog after he got kicked out of the garden? Everything of Genesis 3:18 to 19 is present on top of Karajadog. And just 3 minutes later, he got back to me with his reply. In response, he totally quotes Ezekiel chapter 31, verse 16 through 18 out of context. That quote is out of context. And actually, Ezekiel chapter 36, 35 is actually proof and support that Karajadog is the Garden of Eden. Both Ezekiel 36, 35 and Joel 2, verse 3, they're both contrasting the Garden of Eden with desolation. And that contrast is actually what happened to the Garden of Eden, as the Garden of Eden is now desolate. There's nothing up there. It's all barren landscape of just thorns and thistle plants, as I've already shared. So the verses are not prophecies that it would become barren, but these verses are using poetic type writing where they are associating the Garden of Eden with desolation and being barren, which is exactly what it is today. It says there that the trees of the Garden of Eden are, quote, buried under the earth, Ezekiel 31, and then these other verses, and that he believed the pre-flood world was destroyed and buried under mud and lava flows, which is a common false answer. This is incorrect, and I'm going to prove it in this video. So I'm going to go ahead and share the verses and prove that Ken is out of context when he's quoting these things. In Ezekiel chapter 31, verse 16 to 18, he incorrectly quotes it out of context. He's implying that the Garden of Eden went down to the pit, but no, the trees went down to the pit. And just because the trees got swept away in the flood and taken down into the earth when the water was draining out, my vortex hypothesis is that the trees that were waterlogged, they sank to the bottom and they got sucked out. And the trees that were not waterlogged and floating on the top of the water, at some point they got sucked down in a vortex and were taken into the depths of the earth. This passage of Ezekiel chapter 31, 15 through 18 gives us the understanding that the trees of the Garden of Eden were drained out and were taken down into a vortex into the middle of the earth. And you can read about it here, how I covered the deep for him, I restrained the floods thereof, and the great waters were stayed, and I caused Lebanon to mourn for him, and all the trees of the field fainted for him. I made the nations to shake at the sound of his fall, when I cast him down to hell, with them that descend into the pit, and all the trees of Eden, the choice and the best of Lebanon. All that drink water shall be comforted in the nether parts of the earth, so way down deep. They also went down into hell with him unto them that be slain with the sword, and they were with his arm, and dwelt under his shadow in the midst of the heathen. To whom art thou like in glory and in greatness among the trees of Eden? Yet thou shalt be brought down with the trees of Eden unto the nether parts of the earth, at Sheol. Thou shalt lie in the midst of the uncircumcised with them that be slain by the sword. So we see the vortex here bringing the trees. The trees were waterlogged at the bottom. They got sucked down. And then the trees that were floating on top, they got sucked down into the vortex. And here's what that looks like. Okay, so this is a lake in Latvia. And you can see that this is ice and other debris. There's some, oh, that was a big log that just went down. And then here coming up, you're going to see a big log get sucked in as well at the 3:45 mark of the video. But this would be all the dead stuff. Here's the log right here. And you're going to see that whole log just get pulled down into the pit, into this vortex, into the sinkhole in this lake. So this is how all the trees of Eden that got dislodged would have been sucked down into the nether parts of the earth, into Sheol. Okay, this is a sinkhole on a lake in Brazil. And here you can see there's fish right here, there's fish moving down here. There's another fish here getting all stuck in the mud. And that's how we got our fossils after the flood. So a lot of this, not everything got drained out, but this is how some of the fossils happened. The two guys in the boat lived. They were rescued. It does not mean that the Garden of Eden was buried, as I will prove from the scriptures that the Garden of Eden is on a mountain. So if you want, you can read Ezekiel chapter 31, 16 through 18 yourself, and you can see that this is speaking of the Assyrian, that when I cast him down to hell with them that descend into the pit, and all the trees of Eden, the choice and the best of Lebanon. So this is just speaking of what happened at the time of Eden. The trees were taken down. So this is not saying that the garden itself was taken down, because it is on a mountain, as I will prove. Also, he incorrectly quotes Ezekiel 36:35 and Joel 2 verse 3. These verses are using poetic contrast of paradise, the garden, which is paradise, and desolation, which is what actually happened to the Garden of Eden in the case of Joel chapter 2 verse 3. So this event right here in Joel 2:3, a fire devoureth before them, and behind them a flame burneth. The land is like as the Garden of Eden before them, and behind them a desolate wilderness. Yea, nothing shall escape them. And that's exactly what happened
Now, the Garden of Eden at the time of Adam and Eve at creation, it was this beautiful paradise, a garden. And now the Garden of Eden is completely desolate. There's nothing up there but thorn bushes, thorn plants, and thistle plants, and Einkorn Wheat as well. It's desolate. And then Ezekiel chapter 36, 35, and they shall say, this land was desolate. It is become like the Garden of Eden, and the waste and desolate and ruined cities are become fenced and are inhabited. This is talking about the regathering of the real Israelites at likely the 70th Jubilee, and it's about the restoration, the real restoration of Israel. There's going to be sycamore fig trees and vines and everything else, and it's just going to become like a garden again. So Ken is incorrectly quoting this, and now let me go ahead and share that the Garden of Eden was not buried under mud, that it is on top of a mountain, and it's impossible for it to be buried with mud.
So Ken, he rejected my identification
At the time of our messaging. Since this messaging, he has sent me a list that he compiled, a list that he identified, that Noah is a type of Adam. And I'm going to go ahead and share that as well in this video.
and part of 10-hour-old hypothesis of the thorns and thistles curse, Adam, Eden, and the garden, and stated his opinion that the Garden of Eden has been buried by mud and lava flows. For those who share the same idea that the Garden of Eden was buried under mud, let's talk about that. Most mountains are next to mountains, so the mud would have to bury a mountain range. For mud to bury a mountain range, the mud would have to be contained, and the mountain would have to be located like in the middle of a basin with no outlet for the mud to flow out. And the basin would have to fill in completely with mud. And it's not logical when one thinks about it. And even more so, I'm going to share that what the prophet Ezekiel says. He says that the Garden of Eden is on a mountain. And here it is in Ezekiel chapter 28, verse 13 and 14, speaking about the anointed cherub. Thou hast been in Eden, the garden of Elohim. Thou art the anointed cherub that covereth, and I have set thee so. Thou wast upon the holy mountain of Elohim, and thou hast walked up and down in the midst of the stones of fire. So here, the prophet Ezekiel is identifying that the Garden of Eden is a mountain. So that is something to consider what the scriptures say. And there's even more. I found this location here as I was preparing this presentation. I use a lot of the book of Jubilees, and in the book of Jubilees it also says the Garden of Eden is on a mountain. And this is Jubilees chapter 4, verse 23 through 25. We have Enoch. This is about Enoch and how Enoch was taken from amongst the children of men, and we conducted him into the Garden of Eden. And then it talks about on the account of the judgment of the world that Yahweh brought the waters of the flood upon all the land of Eden. And then down here in verse 25, and he, Enoch, burnt the incense of the sanctuary, even sweet spices acceptable before Yahweh on the mount. So here you see that the Garden of Eden is on a mountain. And that is exactly what Ezekiel just shared. So in my mind, regarding Ken's reply to me, I disagreed with Ken's response in my mind, and I knew that these thorns and thistles was the curse of Adam. It just had to be. If not the post-garden exile location of Adam and Eve, a place called Elda, according to the book of Jubilees, then by process of elimination, Karajadog must also be the Garden of Eden. And there's even more. But first here is the punishment on Adam. Genesis chapter 3. And unto Adam he said, because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and hast eaten of the tree of which I commanded thee, saying, thou shalt not eat of it, cursed is the ground for thy sake, in sorrow shalt thou eat of it all the days of thy life. Thorns also and thistles shall it bring forth to thee, and thou shalt eat the herb of the field. In the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread, till thou return unto the ground, for it was thou that thou hast taken. From dust thou art, and shall dust thou return. And so what you see here, this curse that's on Adam, the curse of thorns and thistles, was issued while Adam was still in the garden before his expulsion and exile. as you can see that his expulsion from the garden came in verse 21 and 22. So he gets the atonement made, and then after the atonement, he is then expelled from the Garden of Eden. So the thorns and thistles that I shared, that I saw, that I recognized, that I identified, related to Adam, whether it was the place of exile that he went or the place before, though I was convinced after seeing that, and I'm still convinced now if you can't tell. But there's way more information that I'm going to share with you in this video about my discovery, which is a multiple discovery. So it was 2 a.m. in the morning, and after a long day of filming on the mountain, and Ken not being interested at the time in my discovery and my new developing hypothesis, not working with me on it or hashing it out, he said that the Garden of Eden was buried and closed the door. And so I didn't offer hypothesis B, the other alternative possibility of what the garden could be, that Karajadog was also the Garden of Eden. And instead, I just took my conviction. It was 2 a.m. in the morning. I took my conviction of the thorns and thistles that I found on Karajadog of being the literal curse of Adam. I put that on the shelf in my mind, and I went to sleep. So prior to my trip, I was aware that there were 4 rivers in Mesopotamia around Naharaim, and everyone who knows world geography and ancient history knows the Euphrates and the Tigris, but less known is the Kabor and Balik rivers. I studied this area while I was looking at the map, looking at Karajadog as I was preparing for my trip, so I was very aware of it. And my family, we flew into Gaziantep and drove the 4-hour drive through Mesopotamia, or Aram Naharaim, to Diyarbakir. Diyarbakir is right here. And that's where our base camp was at. It was in Diyarbakir. And so we had to drive over, made it purpose to drive over the Euphrates River for the first time, which was an unforgettable experience.
There it is. You guys are crossing the Euphrates River right here. You are crossing the Euphrates River. Yeah, it's the Euphrates River.
And then our first 2 nights that we stayed in Diyarbakir, our hotel was next to the Tigris River. And because of my esteem for the writings of the prophet Ezekiel, I made the effort to drive over the Kabor River on our way back to San Liafra and the Haran area of the Balik River. So when I came back through Mardin, and then I made it purpose to drive through the plain right here, over the Kabor, and come down into San Liafra, and then we visited Haran the following day.
The video of me driving over the Kabor River was right here. And then the next video that I'm about to play, it was taken right here in this cornfield right here, which is just south of Karajadog right here. And I just want to share some of it what the vantage point looks like. So we are south of Karajadog. I took a screenshot on the app on our location, but that's the south of Karajadog. And if Ham City was in the south, this is a natural outlet to the south and to the east for Ham's descendants to come into the plains of Shinar. So this is a mountain range where Mardin is. Mardin is on that mountain range. Behind this house here is Mardin. And again, this is a natural outlet. If they were here and they went east into these plains, and it definitely is completely flat, it's more of a plain land than north of that into the valley that Diyarbakir's in. And currently the camera is pointed like toward Urkesh, the city of Urkesh, which is likely the location that Abraham came from, where Terah was at, and that's in front of Mardin, about 25 miles southeast of Mardin.
More geographical evidence, the springs, creeks, and streams. And during my 2-week exploration documenting Karajadog for Noah's post-flood life on the mountain, I took about 10 trips from our hotel in Diyarbakir to the mountain, up the mountain, down the mountain, and back from the mountain to our hotel in Diyarbakir. So I did that maybe it was like 8 or 10 days. I got to look exactly how many days we did that. And one cannot help when you make this drive around the perimeter, the base of the mountain, as you're going up the slope of the mountain, you can't help but notice the hundreds of springs and streams and creeks coming from all around Karajadog. The mountain is extremely watered, as Genesis 13:10 says. And it turns out all the springs, creeks, and streams of Karajadog feed the 4 watersheds that feed the 4 rivers recorded in Genesis chapter 2, verse 10 through 14. And I'm later going to present my hypothesis on the River of Eden and how it watered these 4 rivers and everything else. I'm going to share that in this video. So here is a picture of Karajadog watershed and how it feeds the 4 rivers as recorded in Genesis chapter 2, 10, verse 14. So this red circle is Greater Karajadog, and these are the watersheds to the 4 rivers in Genesis chapter 2, 10, verse 14. I'm going to be sharing that more coming up. So you all should have been watching part 1 about Karajadog being the mountain of Noah and that discovery there. And in it, I heavily relied upon the Dead Sea Scrolls, Genesis, Apocryphon. It contains very unique information that can only be privy to Noah. It's written in the first person account of Noah. It was preserved in the Dead Sea Scrolls for about 2,000 years, and we still have fragments of these writings. And as I shared in my previous presentation, Karajadog, the Mountain of Noah, that the Genesis Apocryphon of the Dead Sea Scrolls contains that first-person record of Noah, of his first exploration of the mountain after he disembarked off the ark for the first time. And Noah, in that record, he said that the mountain had grass, herbs, which is legumes, and grain on the mountain right here. And that means that it was wild grass, wild legumes or herbs, and wild grain. So here's the verse, Genesis Apocryphon, column 12, and I'm going to be reading that. So first, line 1, I, Noah. So that's first person. This is Noah's writing. It's recorded that was passed down like 2,400 years to the writers at Qumran in the Dead Sea. I, Noah, was in the door of the ark, and then there's fragments of the Dead Sea Scrolls missing. Then I, Noah, went out and walked through the land in its length and its breadth. So he's on the mountain. Text is missing. So the fragment of that text is missing. Upon it, pleasures in their leaves and fruit. Speaking of grapes, I lean towards grapes, but I could be mistaken there. And all the land was filled with grass, herbs, and grain. So he is giving us his first-person account that only Noah could know. This is placing Noah at the scene of Karajadog, which I'm going to explain using DNA fingerprinting coming up that I used in my previous video. By saying that, that means that when he walked through the land for the first time, with grass, herbs, and grain already being on the mountain that his ark landed on, that means that it was wild grass, wild herbs, and wild grain. And so that's very significant in this. And the reason why I've shared that in my previous video is because DNA fingerprinting traces back, you can trace it back of the Einkorn Wheat, and it identifies 3 of the 8 founder crops. Originate began created on Karajadog in southeastern Turkey. Einkorn Wheat, which is grass, it's wheat grass. It's Einkorn Wheat right here. This is called grass, and it's a grain, okay? He said he saw wild herbs, and in my previous video, I shared that chickpea right here. It's a legume, but the plant is designated as an herb. Same thing with bitter vetch. Bitter vetch is also a legume right here, but it is also classified as an herb. So he saw herbs yielding seed, and the seed is the legume. So that was on that, and this is just as the creation count says of Genesis chapter 1 says. In the Genesis chapter 1 creation count, it talks about the herb yielding seed, and it talks about grass at the time of creation in Genesis chapter 1. You can't go back any further to the wheat. It can't go back any further to Karajadog, to the samples that are found on and around Karajadog. Thus, Karajadog is and has to be the location also of creation, not just the origin of the wheat, but was where it originated from and was planted by Yahweh, Elohim. Here goes, Genesis chapter 1, verse 11 to 12. And Elohim said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth. And it was so. And the earth brought forth grass, and herb yielding seed after his kind, and the tree yielding fruit, whose seed was in itself after his kind, and Elohim saw that it was good. So here you see grass and herb yielding seed at the time of creation in Genesis chapter 1, 11 through 12, very early at the first chapter of the first book of the Torah, okay? And so that's what you have. And so that means that it not only that this location where he had it created, it originated there. So by using DNA fingerprinting, scientists in 1997 traced back, they found out that Einkorn Wheat originates on this mountain. Not only does it put Noah at this mountain of this location, this puts this wheat, you can't go back any further than the beginning, the wild wheat that was later domesticated, and that's traced, and that is found here, which means that this is also the location of creation.
Also in my previous video, I identified that Karajadog is at the epicenter of the modern distribution of the ancient wild grape. Right here, Karajadog is at the center. To the north, to the south, to the east, and to the west, Karajadog is in the epicenter of the distribution of the wild grape.
So Karajadog, also the Garden of Eden. And here you see Karajadog, a profile picture that I took of Karajadog. Here's the north side. Here's the southern slope. This is the north slope. This is the top. It's a shield volcano. And what I am saying in my last video is after floating on the water, Noah's Ark came to rest on Karajadog Mountain, which is also the Garden of Eden. And he went there to restart humanity and the earth. And Noah, he hid and encoded his landing location in the record he left for us in the Dead Sea Scrolls, Genesis Apocryphon. Like I shared, there was about 10 lines of text missing right before it, lines 2 through 10, so that's like 8 lines missing of text using DNA fingerprinting. It has been confirmed. It is confirmed. So Noah landed where the original wheat and chickpea and bitter vetch was created.
And here real quick is some shocking scriptural evidence in the Genesis Apocryphon of the Dead Sea Scrolls. This is a new find that I made that I'm inserting into this second edition of this video. And again, this is the Genesis Apocryphon. And as I just said, that Noah encoded, he secretly encoded his landing location. We had text missing in lines 2 through 10. But here in line 12, we have this key word that I just discovered right here that I'm going to explain, that Noah landed in the Garden of Eden, and he used this word right here to encode his secret landing location. This is a first-person account of Noah speaking, and he uses the word that's translated as pleasure right here. And you can see this word right here. And when you do a search result for this word, it's the word Eden. And you can see that word, it's Eden. And you can also see it's the same word as this word for Eden. So Strong's 5731, Strong's 5730. It's the same word, Eden. And then you can see that Eden means pleasure. They also say that it's a site unknown, but not anymore. So right here, Noah is giving us a clue that he encoded into his first-person account that was preserved in the Dead Sea Scroll fragments for the last 2,000 years in the Dead Sea, which goes back to 4,400 years. And there's even more information contained in this first-person account of Noah that verifies that Noah was on this mountain that we could use using DNA fingerprinting. This was not included in my first videos, but in my second edition videos, you're seeing it right now as I just found it, as I'm editing my video. I barely have any Hebrew skills, so what I was doing, I was cutting and pasting word for word these words in a Google search to see what the Strong's meaning of the word is, and this what came up as Eden, and I discovered that that word for pleasure is Eden. So, HallelwYAH.
And there are a lot of parallels of the post-flood life of Noah and Adam, the first man. So Noah, he became the progenitor of man. Adam was the progenitor of man. Noah became a tiller of Adumah, which is red soil. Adam was a tiller of the Adumah, red soil. That was his job. Noah planted and kept a vineyard. Adam kept the garden 7 years, and then after that, he had to also till the land where he was at, work the land. Noah saved the animals. Adam named the animals. On the 17th day of the second month, Noah, the flood waters started. Also, the 17th day of the second month, Noah disembarked the ark after the flood, according to Dead Sea Scrolls 4Q252. On the 17th day of the second month, Adam and Eve ate of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and the curses came on that day. Also, that was when atonement was made. Vicarious atonement was made for Adam and Eve on that day. A kippurim, a covering for them. It doesn't say kippur, but it is a kippur, it was a covering for them. So the flood judgment came on the day of the fall and sin of Adam and Eve. But also atonement was made on that day, vicarious atonement, and a type of atonement going forward to the future of Messiah Yeshua, the only begotten Son of Elohim, and who is the Lamb of Elohim and take away the sin of the world. For those who believe upon him, who fear Yahweh Elohim of the penalty of their sin and repent and trust in the sacrifice, the atoning blood of his only Son.
And here's the second parallel of Adam and of Noah that was made by Ken Griffith in a comment that he left me, and I agree with almost all of it. I have just a small little change to it. Ken does not necessarily believe yet that the Karajadog is the Garden of Eden, but here he's saying that if Noah landed on Karajadog, there is a sense that if Noah's landing site is truly Karajadog, then Karajadog is the second Garden of Eden. But what I'm saying in this video is Karajadog is also the first Garden of Eden and also the second as a type. So here we go ahead and see the following sequences of events of Genesis 1 through 5 and Genesis 6 through 11. They parallel each other. Here's the theme. Creation. Universe begins as a ball of water. I think it was a flat earth. Spirit of Elohim on the waters by separating light from darkness, water above and from water below, and land from sea. Elohim creates the earth. The flood. The earth becomes a ball of water. Actually, flat earth. Okay? Earth becomes covered in water. The spirit of Elohim dwells with Noah in the ark. Elohim separates the water and land again, causing the ark to come to rest. Blessing. All the animals are present. Elohim says, be fruitful and multiply, but don't do X, eat from the specific tree. Blessing. Noah and all the animals come out. Elohim blesses them and says, be fruitful and multiply, but don't do X, eat flesh with the blood in it. 3. Fall and curse. A command is broken, resulting in a curse. 3. Fall and curse. Ham exposes Noah's nakedness, and Canaan receives a curse. Rebellion. Cain murders Abel and goes to the east, land of Nod, and builds a city. Rebellion. Nimrod is mighty against Yahweh, and he goes east, building cities. 5. The faithful line waits upon Yahweh for deliverance. Noah is born in the 10th generation. Here you have judgment, the Tower of Babel. Elohim comes down to see the Tower of Babel and confuses the languages. Then you have the faithful line awaits upon Yahweh for deliverance. Abraham is born in the 10th generation. Here you have judgment. The flood comes and turns the earth into water again, covers the earth with water again. So there you have it. These two themes, when I saw that, I was really impressed. And HallelwYAH, and seeing how this first theme is a mirror of the second theme, or the second theme is of the first theme, and they both happened on the same mountain where the Garden of Eden was, and that which is Karajadog.
After my exploration of Karajadog and touring southeast Turkey in the month of December 2022, my family and I returned to our home base in Cyprus for 2 months while I started building out and organizing my presentation on Karajadog, which I just did, and that was it turned out to be about 275 slides that I just read in that last video. I also worked on other projects. Here they are right here. You can see them, videos that I did. And then after that 2 months, I then did a month exploration in Egypt and Sinai Peninsula, exploring the possibilities of a southern exodus route of the Israelites. And then spent a month in northwest Saudi Arabia exploring different mountains, searching for the real Mount Sinai. It has yet to be discovered. During those months, I produced several videos on other topics, as you see. About 2 weeks ago, as I was exploring in Saudi Arabia, I joined a Facebook group named Bible Digs, Archaeology, and Biblical History, which is administered by Nate Loper. And you can see I joined the group April 22nd, 2022. Today's May 6th. Within a day of joining the group, I scrolled through recent posts and I came across a 3 days old post by a researcher named Gary Spire. Gary posted an obscure picture of an obscure archaeological site asking if anyone had information about the location. Maybe, and here's the picture right here, maybe 1,000 people in the world could visually identify the location by this picture. And I just happened to be one of them. Maybe 1,000 people, who knows? But it's a really obscure site. And here's Gary Spire. He has a white dot for his profile picture, and he's asking if anybody has information on the site. And amazingly, I had been to this site 5 months ago while exploring Karajadog and had studied the satellite Airbus images of this location, the Google Earth images of this location. So I recognized this site before even reading his short post, and it was really exciting seeing someone ask information about this site that I was just at that probably nobody in the world, really nobody in the world knows about, maybe just a handful of people. So I knew that it was Ham's city that he named after his first wife, and the city is in the book of Jubilees is called Na-el-ta-ama-uk, which is actually named after his wife, Naama, which is a daughter of Cain, of the seed of Cain. So in my previous video, I shared my recent identification and discovery of her name in that city. That city, Ham City that you see right here, was first identified by King Griffith as Ham's city, and he identified it as Arata. I was aware that the name was Melituk, and I found that name, Naama's name, in there. So it excited me tremendously to see this image, and wow, it was something. Later, after I settled down from the excitement of recognizing the image, a lot going on while I'm in Saudi Arabia, a lot of things that I'm working on, a lot of things I'm researching, I read his post, and the buzzwords, quote, Eden and 4 rivers, and the smiley face emoji resonated with me. They all triggered me to recall my working hypothesis that I had shelved back on December 11th/12th, that day, that late night, that early morning, that Karajadog was also the Garden of Eden.
Okay, so Gary's post says, does anyone have any information regarding this archaeological site with respect to its age? I believe it to be the location of the children of Eden, in addition to Vantage, which was also anciently known as Tela or Hor-Hasar, Telasar. He gives the coordinates of the site, and then he says an inside joke. And this inside joke just floored me, and immediately it just triggered and recalled everything, and I knew exactly where I had been without even any other information. He says it is situated between the 4 and then smiling face emoji, Rivers of Eden. It absolutely floored me because I had been there 5 months prior. And I had this suspicion that this was the place that Adam went in exile or was the Garden of Eden. But I had no one to share this with because I had yet to produce my other video and I did not want to talk about all my findings. So this just totally recalled all of that, and now it's history. HallelwYAH.
And as it turned out, Gary was asking his question as a conversation starter to follow up to a follow-up comment that he would later post in his thread that I would read later in his thread. I didn't see it. He posted it before, but I didn't read it. And here it is. And it turns out, as I skimmed Gary's comment about the Garden of Eden being greatly watered, and the fact that Ezekiel states that the Garden of Eden was on a mountain, and the facts that I had read before, but not registered. These are facts that I've read over before, but have never registered. They confirmed my hypothesis about Karajadog being the Garden of Eden, and I knew that Gary had correctly identified it biblically and discovered the Garden of Eden as Karajadog. So Gary's Facebook post was a conversation starter for his obscurely known discovery he published in April 2019 that Karajadog is the Garden of Eden.
This is Gary's academia page, and this is his draft on the Garden of Eden. And right now, at this time of this presentation, it only has 6 views. So his and mine, our multiple discovery, is relatively obscure at the time of this video.
So a few days later, I left Gary a comment that I had been to this site 5 months prior, not telling him why I was at the site, and I shared a couple of pictures I took of the area. In response, Gary sent me a link to his website where his full paper is about Karajadog being the Garden of Eden is published, not a draft. And we've been in dialogue via chat and email for about the last 7 days. Now it's probably about the last 9 days. And I want to acknowledge Gary Spire and recognize him as the first multiple discoverer of Karajadog as the Garden of Eden. And it's a very big discovery. But at the same time, because I'm presenting his paper, as a disclaimer, my acknowledgement is not a complete endorsement of his paper on his website. So that's totally understandable. I do have some objections to several details of his supporting evidence and several of his hypotheses and his interpretations of Scripture, and have some of my own hypotheses interpretations that I am going to present.
The biggest hypothesis that I'm going to explain is not just a hypothesis. I think I can prove that the River of Eden is living water. And this is a discovery that I made just by understanding the scriptures I am going to share. So this is a big distinction between myself and Gary's paper, is this understanding.
Additionally, I do not agree with Gary Spire's location for the location of the Garden of Eden on Karajadog. He has it as one hill, and he has the river next to this hill, which is on a slope, on the south slope, but not on top of the mountain. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about that. But I do still agree that Gary is correct that Karajadog in general is the Garden of Eden. His location is, I believe, incorrect.
So here is Gary's email that he sent me with his coordinates. I'm going to be taking a look at these coordinates. He talks about this river and stream that crosses this highway at this location right here, these coordinates. And that he says if you follow carefully north, that stream, you arrive in the Garden of Eden. So a couple of problems here is that this stream doesn't break up into 4 rivers. Secondly, the watershed from this hill, which is of the greater Karajadog, but from this southern hill, I don't think that the watershed makes it to the Euphrates River. The above ground and the below ground watershed from this hill on the southern slope does not make it to the Euphrates. It appears that the watershed is into the Kabor watershed of the Kabor River. It does not make it to the Balik River, nor does it make it to the Euphrates River from Gary's proposed garden location. And I will demonstrate that coming up. But just because Gary doesn't have this correct location of the garden, he does have the general location of the garden being on Karajadog Mountain, Greater Karajadog Mountain. And again, the River of Eden isn't just a stream, one stream, it's a watershed of living water, as I will prove later in this video. So I don't think that this is the location for the River of Eden. I do believe that Gary got it correct that the Greater Karajadog is the Garden of Eden, but this hill that's on top of it, I doubt that this is it. And my opinion is he's incorrect.
So here's Gary's compiled list of 10 pieces of biblical evidence of the location of the Garden of Eden from his website, GarySpire.com. And here is where Gary Spire did research and found an older map of Mansuel's ethnographical pre-World War I map of eastern Turkey. And in it, it identifies the city Varanashir as Hor-Hasser, which is also Tel Asser. And it says in Isaiah 37:12, have the gods of the nations delivered them which my fathers have destroyed, as Gozan, and Haran, as Rezeph, and the children of Eden, which were in Tel Asser. So here we see,
and this is Isaiah speaking to Hezekiah, and Isaiah knows where the children of Eden are, and even Hezekiah knows that they're in Tel Asser. So if Isaiah knows where they are, and Hezekiah knows where they are, that the children of Eden are in Tel Asser, then they know the area of Eden.
it's where Tel Asser is. And we know where Tel Asser is because of this ethnographical pre-world map. So that is something to consider. So the rest of this presentation contains more scriptural and physical evidence about Karajadog, the Garden of Eden, and will be a blend of Gary's presentation and my original information that I have to share as well, because I am also a multiple discoverer of it.
Even though on my hypotheses, I put it on the shelf, and if had I not seen Gary's post and read those buzzwords in the form of an inside joke, which I just happened to be on the inside, I knew it. So, but it had not been for Gary's inside joke, my hypotheses would have still been on the shelf this day.
So this is the information that I'm going to be sharing about Karajadog, also the Garden of Eden. This is the scriptural evidence.
The shocking word proof that Noah used the word Eden to describe his landing location, as found in the Genesis Apocryphon of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And here is that word Eden, it's Eden. And then also in part 1, I proved the geographical features of Karajadog match Noah and his sons' cities and all the post-flood records of Genesis, Jubilees, and the Dead Sea Scrolls, of where the ark rested on and where the mountains, the local mountains were seen, where the altar was, Noah then descending the mountain yet still on top of the mountain, Shem's city fronting the mountain on the east, Ham moved far away and off the top of the mountain on the southern slope, and Japheth moved west off the top of the mountain and on the western slope.
The curse of thorns and thistles of Genesis chapter 3 verse 18. Already covered that. Ezekiel says the Garden of Eden is a mountain. That's in Ezekiel 28, 13 and 14. And then Jubilees chapter 4 verse 23 through 25. The wild grass, the wild legumes, the herb-bearing seeds of Genesis chapter 1, 11 through 12. And then the Genesis Apocryphon of the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Garden of Eden was very well watered. Genesis chapter 13 verse 10. The River of Eden and the 4 riverheads of Genesis chapter 2 verse 10 through 14. The flaming sword and spewing volcano, Genesis chapter 3 verse 24. Ezekiel saw Karajadog volcano while captive on the Kabar River, Ezekiel chapter 1. Ezekiel says the Garden of Eden is a mountain, again, Ezekiel chapter 28 verse 13 through 14. The anointed cherub that covereth, Ezekiel chapter 28, 13 through 14 again. The trees of the Garden of Eden, Ezekiel chapter 31, verse 8 through 9. And then my proposed former locations of the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil on top of Karajadog per Genesis chapter 2, verse 9. So the Garden of Eden had a lot of water. Genesis chapter 13, verse 10. Quote, and Lot lifted up his eyes and beheld all the plain of Jordan, and it was well watered everywhere before Yahweh destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of Yahweh Eden, like the land of Egypt, as thou comest unto Zoar. So here in the context of this verse, we see that Lot is looking on the plain of Jordan. And this is interesting because it says, as thou comest unto Zoar, like Egypt, as thou comest unto Zoar. But Zoar is at the south of the valley, south of the plain of the Jordan. So that doesn't make a lot of sense. So Zoar, as I said, is relatively close to Sodom and Gomorrah, and it's one of the 5 cities of the plain. Thus, this passage might be talking about Zoan, which is Tanis, Egypt. And that means that there could have been just a small scribal error on the last letter, as Zoan and Zoar are spelled exactly the same. It's just a resh and a noon is the difference. This account of Lot likely came from Abraham. And Abraham, he came from Urkesh, which is just south of Karajadog, And that's new information. A lot of people think that he came from Ur the Chaldees is down by Baghdad in central Iraq, or even lower down by the Persian Gulf or the Arabian Sea, or maybe it's by Shanli Urfa by Haran, but actually Abraham came from Urkesh. This video here
By Liam Gracie.
is a good video to watch regarding Urkesh. And Urkesh is just south of Karajadog. Also, some texts say that Abraham was trained by Shem, and Abraham had the first book of Enoch, says the Genesis Apocryphon Dead Sea Scrolls, which also gives us the information about the account of Noah, the first person account of Noah on the mountain. He read, Abraham literally had the book of Enoch, first Enoch, and read it to Pharaoh Zoan.
Servants.
Right here, Zoan, the Pharaoh of Zoan, or Pharaoh of Tanis, read Pharaoh's servants that wisdom of Enoch, and they all praised Abraham about how wise he was, I think, regarding that, him reading and having the book of Enoch on him. Where did he get the book of Enoch from? Shem. Okay? And where did Shem get it from? His father, Noah. Where did Noah get it from? Enoch. It was on the ark. And HallelwYAH, I actually had the book of Enoch with me in my backpack while I was on Karajadog. HallelwYAH. So it was very well watered land, and as I shared before, this is a picture of one of the hundreds of creeks, and maybe one of the thousands of small seeping springs on Karajadog. This right here is like a spring, and the spring water is seeping out right here that you can see going back into this creek. And this is a creek coming down, and there's hundreds of creeks and maybe thousands of small springs here on Karajadog. Here is a picture that I took of a spring pool. Right here, this is a pool of water, a head of water, a head of a small creek, and maybe one of 1,000 small creeks here. As you can see, the pool of water forming into the small little creek and going down and out on through all of these rocks, this rocky terrain here on Karajadog slope. Here's a screenshot of a video I took, so it's not that great of a quality of picture, but you can see Karajadog here in the background and more streams coming down the mountain. It's very well watered. Here I am driving through a village, and just one of many creeks here, and here's a bridge going over it. Many creeks coming out of Karajadog.
The River of Eden and the 4 waterheads.
So I knew that there were 4 rivers in the area, and while I was at Karajadog, I didn't understand how it all related. Here are the 4 rivers, and I'm going to go take you through Genesis chapter 2, verse 10 through 14, and explain how this all works, give you my hypothesis and understanding, which I think is the most logical and proven one, considering that there is no river of Eden that we can identify that branches out in 4 heads. So it says in Genesis, and a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from thence it was parted and became into 4 heads. I'll be taking a look at that verse. The name of the first is Pishon, that is, which compasseth the whole land of Havilah, which there is gold. And the gold of that land is good. And there is bdellium and the onyx stone. I've identified that as the Al-Kabor River. Same with Gary, Spire. Verse 13, and the name of the second river is Gihon. The same is that compasseth the whole land of Ethiopia, Cush. That's the river Balik. Now everybody thinks Gihon is the river that's coming out of Jerusalem, and I'm going to explain why the river Balik is the Gihon, because it shares a very similar quality as the Gihon River, the Gihon Spring and River that's coming out of the city of David. And the name of the third river is the Hiddekel, and that is which goeth toward the east of Assyria. And we know this today as the river Tigris, and if you're in Türkiye, it is the Gihon River. And the fourth river is Euphrates, and that's how it's translated in the King James Bible. And we know that today to be the river Euphrates. So everybody knows the river Euphrates, and everybody knows the Tigris River if you study this Mid-East, ancient, Near East culture, Near East studies. You know those 2 major rivers, the geography. You know those 2 major rivers. So here we have Karajadog, the Garden of Eden, right here, circled in red. You can see this is the top of the Garden of Eden, and then this is the lower part as it going out. This is the different elevations. And I shared this graphic earlier, but now I put on these locations of Havilah and Cush, and this is according to Judges 3:8. I cite to Gary Spire's article. The waters of Karajadog are feeding 4 different
Rivers via 4 different watersheds.
And regarding the Balik River, I shared that it is part of an aquifer, a limestone aquifer, that flows into the Balik River and also the Kabor rivers, and there is a spring that feeds it. So that's a major source of these 2 rivers. And right here is Haran. This is Shanli-Urfa. This is Haran. This is the Balik River coming down, starting here, coming down like this. And coming from right here is the River Kabor. And I want to draw your attention right here to this watershed, or this creek right here, and how it flows down here. You can barely see it. It's very faint, but this is the best that I could take. And this is Turkey, and then this is Syria. So they have 2 different dates of the pictures that they took. It's during summertime months where it's dry here, while this was taken during spring. The imaging was taken obviously during spring. But here you can see this faint line.
Okay, this is not a river, this is a creek bed, and it is a dry creek bed, but sometimes it has water in it, as you can see, and there is subterranean water flow flowing through here. In the elevation, it can work its way out and flows into here, into the Balik River. Now, the Balik River starts right here in this Ain al-Arus, right there. That's where the Balik River starts, one of the heads of the Balik River, and it is part of a limestone aquifer. And Ain in Arabic is spring, so it is a spring aquifer. It's a limestone spring aquifer. And this is why it has the same name as the Gihon River in Jerusalem, because the Gihon River starts as a limestone aquifer, spring gusher. But just because the main source of the water is the limestone aquifer doesn't mean that this is not one of the heads, as the River of Eden splits into 4 watersheds, and so that means that this is some of the water flows into this river and out.
How this river that comes all the way up down from Karajadog comes through here, through these limestone hills, and also comes down into here and feeds into the Balik River. Also, there's possibly water flowing underneath this aquifer system, flowing through cracks in the limestone aquifer underground, which is very viable. So here you see again the 4 watersheds flowing into the Euphrates this way, into the Digil or the Tigris, the Hiddekel this way, into the Pishon, which is the Kabor River right here, and flows down. This is the Kabor River that the prophet Ezekiel was in exile on. And also the elders of Judah. And then here you see the Balik River, what we call the Gihon River. So there, and the Gihon River flows into the Euphrates River. I knew that this land was occupied by descendants of Ham, thus Cush, but I did not have the identification of Judges 3:8. I knew that also there was gold from up here, but Gary also, and he identified this in his paper. So that is something to consider of the land of Havilah and the land of Cush. And Gary gives an explanation on how those rivers encompass it that I was unaware of the usage, and that was new for me. So the river of Eden, Genesis chapter 2, verse 10, quote, "And a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from thence it was parted and became into 4 heads." So where is thence? Thence is the garden. The river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from the garden the river was parted and became into 4 heads. In Gary's paper, he presents his Holocene hypothesis to the river of Eden. Gary proposes a 10-kilometer creek bed on top of Karajadog as the river of Eden. But the problem that I found with his proposal is that it does not branch into 4 river heads.
Okay, so Genesis 2:10 said that the river went out of Eden and then it parted from the garden. So into 4 heads from the garden. So here I believe is the pin that Gary sent me. This is the pin location. He said to follow this river up, and then as you go up, you get to the garden. And I think that this is the location that he has for the garden. If I'm mistaken, then it might be right here. But he does not have it at the top of the mountain. The top of the mountain begins right about at this level, is about the top base of the mountain. The top base of the mountain starts about right here. So he has the garden right here. And from right here, this stream bed does not split into 4 heads of 4 rivers. It doesn't do it right here because any water that would flow out from right here, flowing west, it would get caught up and then have to flow south. It would get caught into this watershed and water network right here, this Karacadag Creek. So this is Karacadag Creek, and this creek flows down into the River Kabor. So this keeps flowing into the River Kabor right here. So any water that flows to the west will hit this watershed and flow into here. So it does not, this water does not flow into the Euphrates River over here in the west. So I believe that Gary is mistaken in that the Garden of Eden is here on the top, and the river that flows out of Eden is the living waters and the springs that all come around that disperse from Karajadog.
And I propose that the verse is describing something else, and I'm going to propose my hypothesis now. So this is an email that I sent to Gary, and I told him about my unorthodox approach to identifying and locating the river of the Garden of Eden. And I told him that I recognized that his 10-kilometer stream bed top of that. And I think that Genesis chapter 10, verse 2 is a tricky verse. And that I bring up the fact of river bifurcation. And that means, in Latin, it forks, the river forking. And that usually occurs when a river is flowing in a single stream and then it separates into 2 or more or separate streams called distributaries, which then continue downstream. Some rivers form complex networks of distributaries, typically in their deltas as it flows into a lake or as it flows into the sea. The delta is the tail end of the river system, not the head of the river system. So for it to split, so for the river to split and form heads, that doesn't make a lot of sense. So I think that there's something more going on in Genesis chapter 2, verse 10, that the river parted into 4 heads. And I shared again that the 10-kilometer stream on top of Karajadog does not have river purification into 4 rivers. Notice in the verse that the river of Eden was parted from, quote, from thence. And in context of the verse, thence is the garden. Again, there's something more going on, that the river parted from the garden. We both acknowledge that the waters of Karajadog flow into 4 rivers. Thus, there are 4 watersheds. Sometimes rivers start as streams that start as creeks. This means creeks are at the head of the rivers. So in Genesis chapter 2, verse 10, by heads, it could be meaning beginning source, and thus 4 watersheds full of creeks. Then the streams then feed into the 4 rivers. So then I share with Gary how I couldn't help but notice how well-watered Karajadog is, and I shared with him, as he already knows, Karajadog is a shield volcano. But what he might not know is that it has hundreds, if not thousands, of small seeping springs of water coming out around the mountain's huge base that accumulates into creeks and then converge into streams and then to the rivers. What I am suggesting is that the river of Eden is to be living water. The river of Eden that watered the garden and that parted from the garden must be a subterranean river or aquifer that likely had a higher output prior to the flood, but the remnants of that aquifer is still going and still seen today. I did find one area near the top level of the mountain that had 4 active small springs, 4 or 5, maybe around 1,700 meters in elevation. I have to check. And then I told him, important to note regarding all 4 watersheds and watersheds in general, some watersheds are groundwater flows underground, where the water flows underground. And this is important for the Gihon Balik River. Also note that the Gihon spring in Jerusalem is a living water siphoned spring that is coming from a limestone aquifer. So right there, I make that share that how the Balik River is coming from a limestone aquifer, but most of it, the water is moving underground, and that also and also the Gihon spring in Jerusalem is also a limestone aquifer, living water. This is where I made my hypothesis and understanding that the River of Eden was living water, not an accumulation of mist or dew from the Holocene period. The Hebrew word for river, right here, Nahar, very interesting. One of the usage is underground. As you can see right here, it's underground streams, per Job chapter 20, verse 11. And thus, it's talking about subterranean, which I wasn't aware of the usage of this word being underground streams when I presented this to Gary. This was in a follow-up email. And I was unaware of this when I shared my hypothesis with him about the living water as the River of Eden. Job chapter 20, verse 11, quote, says, "He bindeth the floods from overflowing, and the thing that is hid bringeth he forth to light," end quote. So this is speaking about underground streams.
Living water.
Psalm chapter 46, verse 4 and 5 is interesting. Quote, "There is a river, the streams whereof shall make glad the city of Elohim, the holy place of the tabernacles of the Most High. Elohim is in the midst of her, she shall not be moved. Elohim shall help her, and that right early." And that's Psalm 46. And is Psalm 46 speaking of Jerusalem? If so, the river is a subterranean spring gusher from an aquifer, the Gihon, or at least a metaphorical heavenly Jerusalem, earthly Jerusalem, as in heaven, so on earth. So that's what you have here. You have living water. So again, that's what I presented to Gary, and that's what I present to you all regarding the River of Eden. The River of Eden is the springs of water. And from thence, from the river, from the garden, which is the mountain, from thence it was parted and became 4 heads, 4 watersheds of creeks that flow into streams that flow into those rivers. So the head of the watershed, it starts high up with springs, with the water coming up and then out of the mountain, seeping out of the mountain. So that is the river, the living water, River of Eden.
Okay, so I'm going to be sharing with you some on-site footage on Karajadog here on this plain or this plateau, this area right here on the west slope of Karajadog. I'm going to start the video right here, standing here, filming this small creek, this little waterfall from this creek that's flowing down into this area here. And then I'm going to be walking up, I'm going to zoom up, then I'm going to start the video here again, and I'm going to walk through this green area and document all of these little springs that are coming out of the ground, old springs that are dried up, new springs. Then I'm going to go to the top of the spring. Now, while I was on Karajadog, this is the highest elevation spring I was able to see. And it just so happens that this spring, like I just said, this is the head. This turns out that this is actually the head of the Euphrates River right here that's mentioned, that comes out of the Garden of Eden. It said the River of Eden split into 4 heads. Well, and I said it's a living water. This living water literally comes out right here and flows down here into this bigger creek. The creek name is in Google Earth. It's not shown right now. And then if you follow it, this creek, you can just basically follow this creek, and the creek keeps going. It's the Ziyaret Creek now, and it flows here into this creek, and that creek, if you keep following this creek, you keep following the creek, flows into this reservoir, which goes into this creek. It keeps going, and it keeps going. You keep following the creek, you keep following the creek, you keep following this creek, you keep following the creek into another reservoir, which comes into this creek, which keeps flowing west, keeps flowing west, keeps flowing west. Okay, I don't know how much more I have to go. Sorry, it's taking a little bit long. Oh, and it just hit into the Euphrates River right here. And so what you're seeing about to see is the head of the Euphrates River right here, coming from this creek of living water, which is the River of Eden, which is the living water, which is parted from the Garden of Eden. And that is Mount Karajadog, Türkiye. And just like in the temple, in Ezekiel's temple, it starts off with a small creek and that stream, and it becomes a huge river by the time it enters into the Dead Sea, which is going to be the born-again sea. It's going to start as a small creek, and I shared with you, it flows right into the Euphrates. So this is the head of the Euphrates. It's coming out of the Garden of Eden, which is Karajadog, Türkiye. Starts from thence, which it comes from the River of Eden, which is a huge aquifer of living water coming out of Greater Karajadog Mountain. HallelwYAH. So here's the river that I just showed you. It starts as a small little creek up here, forms into a stream, and that stream comes all the way down through here and into the Euphrates River, starting here at the top of Karajadog. Here's the video footage. The watershed can start up here. This creek is going to start right here in this area, right here. The water's coming out of here, living water comes out and flows in. There are other dried creek beds here from other water flow, and there are other dried out springs that you can see up here on the top. I certainly did not walk the whole entire mountaintop while I was there, but right now the video that I'm going to show you is in this area right here. I start here and I'm walking up, and all this water is flowing right into this creek bed, into this stream bed, and then flows out into this Geological Creek, which flows all the way into the River Euphrates. So there's a watershed going into the River Euphrates. Even from up here, there's watershed going out this way. There's watershed going this way to your River Euphrates. There's watershed going here into the Tigris River this way. There's water going east into the Tigris River this way. There's water going straight south into the Kabor River system. And then there is a system, like I just shared, that flows through here into this range right here, through this limestone crack here on top, and probably also subterraneously flows down into here, flows down along here into this darker spot from a different, this was taken in the spring obviously, this was taken in summer, this footage of Syria. After this, south of this white line is Syria, flows into here, and then as you can see it flows into the Bleak River, and then that is the Bleak River with Bleak River. So, and you can not only see just this one coming down, flowing down through there, and possibly flowing through this limestone, cracks in the limestone right here, possibly as well. So this is one huge aquifer coming out of the Garden of Eden, the River of Eden, splitting into 4 heads, 4 watersheds. And this is the one I'm going to be showing you now. Got our first real type of grass that has
some depth to this different color soil here. Got a lot of streams coming out here. You can see a spring head right here. This would be a spring. It's not bubbling anymore, not putting out, but you follow it down and there's a bunch of just springs coming out from this whole valley, this slope right here. And this is the closest sloping plane to the peak of the mountain, which is right here. So you have the mountain peak, you have behind that big mountain is that flat land on the top. But this is a different type of soil, and you have the water all running down.
And just because you don't see it on the surface, there is a lot of water still flowing underground. So you have to consider there's underground flow coming out, especially in all stream beds. You don't think that there's water on top, but underground there is water flowing underground.
Got the water running right here. So coming up to the head of the spring, there's a couple of different streams, but this is the head of one of them. This one's dry right here. This one has a little bit of water going, a low on battery. So I'll get this one, I'll go to the next one over here, and then head to the car. That's one of the heads of the spring, feeding into there, coming out here. Another one right there, another one on the other way.
So maybe there are about 4 or 5 spring heads up here in this area. This is the spring head. This is one of the highest spring heads at the top. So this is actually the head of the Euphrates watershed that is coming out of the Garden of Eden, because the Garden of Eden is a living water aquifer underneath Karajadog, and it's part of a greater watershed here. So as you can see that this soil is dark, it's also moist, and a lot of the water that's coming from this mountain is water moving underground that we don't see. Not necessarily in the form of a subterranean river, but in the form of water flow flowing down in elevation to the sea, to the river, and then out. So it's called a watershed, and most water that flowing underground. So this video is a small little creek that started as a couple spring heads that are just feeding and coming into a creek, and then that creek is going to meet up with more water and become a stream. And so that stream will then flow into the Euphrates River, into the water basin there, and flow out that way. So this is what it means by the heads. It's going to start up here at the top.
So next I want to talk about the flaming sword east of the garden, a volcano, and this I attribute to Gary Spire. In Genesis 3:24, so he drove out the man, and he placed at the east of the Garden of Eden cherubims, and a flaming sword which turned every way, to keep the way of the tree of life, end quote. And here you can see is Karajadog crater right here, and you can see this is lava flow from later on. But Gary identified this as the flaming sword which turneth every other way, which is this volcano. The Karajadog crater is on the east side of the mountain, right where the text says. So that's some geographical information. So important to note, Gary identified the craters on the east side of Karajadog as the flaming sword, just as the text says. And Gary's hypothesis for the flaming sword is the lightning that would come out of a volcanic eruption.
And that volcanic lightning is just a one-time event at the time of the eruption, and it is very, very rare according to this statistic right here.
But I don't know if lightning comes out just the first time when it explodes. I don't think it keeps coming out during the lava spewing out. So what I suggest for the flaming sword could possibly be the lava cone was shooting out lava like 360, but in a half spherical way, up in the air 360 degrees around. So that could be a flaming sword that turned every other way, just the lava shooting chunks of lava out in the air out of the cone. And that could possibly be what that is describing there. Also, according to Gary's article, Gary stated that Ezekiel saw Karacadag volcano while captive on the Kabor River. And Ezekiel, he prophesied, he starts out his prophecy while captive on the Kabor River. Now, Ezekiel chapter 1, now it came to pass in the 30th year of the 4th month and the 5th day of the month, as I was among the captives by the river Kabar, that the heavens were opened and I saw visions of Elohim. In the 5th day of the month, which was the 5th year of King Jehoiakim's captivity, the word of Yahweh came expressly unto Ezekiel the priest, the son of Buzi, in the land of the Chaldeans by the river Kabar, and the hand of Yahweh was upon him there. So here we see that he's having this vision while in the land of Chaldea.
Chaldeans in the Hebrew is really translated as Kashdima. Okay, here's the word that's usually translated as Chaldees or Chaldea or Chaldeans. Here it is. Here's the spelling here. And it's Kaf, Shin, Dalet, Yod, Mem, Hey. And what you got to see is it's translated as Chaldeans, but there's no L in it. There's no Lamed in it. The transliteration is Kashdima, Kash, as in Urkesh, where Abraham was from. Abraham was from Kashdima, and his city was of Kash, Urkesh, of Kashdima. They have it all wrong. They say it's in the southern part by the Persian Gulf. No, it's on the other side of it's all the way in the north by Syria and Turkey's border. This is completely wrong, and most people have this wrong.
By the river Kabar, which is the modern-day Kabur River in northern Syria and low and southern Turkey. Urkesh, where Abraham was from, is right here, just inside the Syrian border. And Terah would have traveled about 230 kilometers to get here, which is about a 10-day journey possibly, to get just to Haran to stop and not make the rest of the trip. Not from Shanli or into Haran. So here you can see that right down here, you follow my mouse right down here, this is the Kabor River coming from Karajadog. Somewhere on this river was where Ezekiel was when he got the prophecy, probably somewhere from here on up. If Ezekiel was like right here, or right here, or right here, that's only 50 miles or 80 miles away. So he totally could have seen Karajadog because of the elevation here is only like 300 or 400 meters above sea level. Karajadog is almost 1,900 meters above sea level. He would at least known that the mountain was here.
So we are south of Karajadog. I took a screenshot on the app on our location, but that's the south of Karajadog. And if Ham City was in the south, this is a natural outlet to the south and to the east for Ham's descendants to come into the plains of Shinar. So this is a mountain range where Mardin is.
So in Ezekiel chapter 1, Gary Spire, he identified the physical location and traits of a volcano in Ezekiel's vision.
Gary's hypothesis of Ezekiel's vision is something like augmented reality, a blend of the spiritual and physical realms that he's seeing at the same time. Gary, I think he hypothesizes that Ezekiel, he saw the volcano explode, and then in it was the vision when he saw the volcano explode. I'm not necessarily buying that. I'm not really certain that that was the case, but I'm definitely open to the possibility, and I'll definitely present that in here. But it could have been either a straight vision. In the north is Karajadog volcano, or it could have been a blend. And he suspects that one of the smaller volcanoes on the east side of Karajadog had its volcanic eruption, and that's what Ezekiel saw with the vision at the same time.
Ezekiel's vision was augmented reality, so a blended reality like AR today.
Augmented reality glasses. VR is you're just seeing virtual reality. AR is when you're seeing real life through the lens, and then it's also projecting other images, other movements, other stuff on the lenses that mixes in with your real reality. So it's called augmented reality.
And Ezekiel chapter 1, I looked and behold, a whirlwind came out of the north, a great cloud and a fire enfolding itself, and a brightness was about it. And out of the midst of the brightness there was the color of amber, which is red, glowing red, out of the midst of the fire. So what he's seeing here is a volcano. Where? A whirlwind coming out of the north. He's seeing this volcanic eruption.
Okay, so here is the Kabor River right along here. This is the Kabor River, and this is Karajadog, and this is a volcano that had exploded, a smaller one. But this is a huge shield volcano. So somewhere he says he's looking north, whether it be like this north, or over here looking north, or down here he's looking north. And remember my vantage point from right about right here, you can see Karajadog pretty well. So this is about 50 miles, and this is about 80 miles from Karajadog. So we are south of Karajadog. I took a screenshot on the app on our location. But that's the south of Karajadog.
Possibly, all of this wind coming out of an eruption and that. Okay, a great cloud, so a volcanic eruption, fire folding in itself, a volcano. Brightness was about it, and out of the midst of it was the color amber, volcano at nighttime, and out of the midst of the fire. So that's what he's seeing. And then he has the vision of the cherubim. And he talks about the likeness of the living creatures, and their appearance was like burning coals of fire, just like a volcano. And the appearance of lamps, okay, which is they're glowing like a lamp. And lava glows. And it went up and down among the living creatures, and the fire was bright. And out of the fire went forth lightning. The living creatures ran and returned as the appearance of a flash of lightning. So what Gary's suggesting is a blended spiritual and physical realm of what's going on here. He presents this in his article. It looks very plausible. Talks about here the vision of the four wheels as they churned. Now this section here, it does not seem, this is now spiritual. This is not a blend of the vision of the four cherubim. This here is more spiritual, talking about how they moved. Okay, then the division of the divine glory, and it talks about the vision of the divine glory and the throne. And in it, there might be some more like description of volcanic description, but this is what really struck me when I read this just a couple of days ago.
Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 26 through 28.
And above the firmament was over the heads was the likeness of a throne, as the appearance of a sapphire stone. And upon the likeness of the throne was the likeness as of the appearance of a man above it. And as I saw as the color of amber, as the appearance of fire round about within it, from the appearance of his loins even upward, and from the appearance of his loins even downward. And I saw, as it were, the appearance of fire, and it had the brightness around about it, as the appearance of the bow that was in the cloud in the day of rain, a rainbow. So was the appearance of the brightness round about. This was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of Yahweh. When I saw it, I fell upon my face, and I heard a voice as one that spake. So this bow, it really hit me, because Karajadog was also the location of Noah, where Yahweh made a covenant with Noah, and then gave the sign of the covenant, which was the rainbow over Karajadog. So we're seeing that same
Rainbow
imagery here of that same location, plural, of Yahweh. And there's a reason why we see it. Because according to the book of Jubilees,
chapter 8,
regarding the Garden of Eden and the Holy of Holies, the mountain of the east, Noah rejoiced that his portion came forth for Shem and for his sons, and he remembered all that was spoken with his mouth in prophecy. For he said, Blessed be Yahweh Almighty of Shem, and may Yahweh dwell in the dwelling of Shem. And he, Noah, knew that the Garden of Eden is the Kodesh of Kodeshim, okay, the Holy of Holies, and the dwelling of Yahweh. So Yahweh dwells above the Garden of Eden, according here at this time, according to the book of Jubilees. And Mount Sinai, the center of the desert, and Mount Zion, the center of the navel of the earth. These three were created as Kodesh places facing each other. So right here we have an account that Noah was rejoicing because all of these three locations were in the land of Shem, the Garden of Eden, the Mount Sinai in the desert, somewhere in Arabia, and then Mount Zion, which we know, which is in Jerusalem. And so that's why it says, the text that it doesn't say that may Japheth dwell in the tent of Shem. Blessed be Yahweh Almighty of Shem, and may Yahweh dwell in the dwelling in the tents of Shem. And that is repeated also, that verse is repeated of Yahweh dwelling in the tents of Shem in another place. So this is important to note that Noah, he rejoiced because he knew where the Garden of Eden was. Why? Because he landed on it. And he knew these other locations, probably prophetically, that this is where it was at. The Garden of Eden, and that's why the Garden of Eden, that's why there's this bow there, because at the time it was of Yahweh's dwelling, and it is considered the Kodesh Kodeshim,
the Holy of Holies. So I think that Gary Spire hypothesizes that there was a volcanic explosion at one of the smaller volcanoes next to Greater Karajadog at the time of Ezekiel the prophet, and Ezekiel saw it, and then simultaneously had a vision.
So now the anointed cherub that was covered in light and set on the mountain. This prophecy started in Ezekiel chapter 26, verse 1, but this is Ezekiel chapter 28, and it was in the 11th year of the captivity. So 6 years after Ezekiel got his first vision in the 5th year of the captivity. So this is this set of prophecies that was given in the 11th year. In Ezekiel chapter 28, verse 11, a lament over the king of Tyre. Now, Gary believes that the king of Tyre physically came on the mountain, I think. I don't subscribe to that hypothesis. The king of Tyre was going to be in siege from like 586 to 573 BC by the Babylonians.
According to this Wikipedia article, the king of Tyre's name was Ithobaal III, and it says he either died near the end of the siege or was replaced as part of the surrender. He was succeeded by Baal II, who was a vassal of Babylon. So I don't think that the king of Tyre, actually the city-state of Tyre, the island, the port city of Tyre, I don't think that the king of Tyre visited Karajadog.
Whatever the case, I believe that this is a metaphorically speaking of the king of Tyre in Ezekiel chapter 28. I think the actual prophecy about the literal king of Tyre was Ezekiel like chapter 26, but this is, right now we are getting metaphorical speaking of the king of Tyre. Son of man, take up a lamentation upon the king of Tyrus and say to him, Thus saith Yahweh Elohim, Thou sealest up the sum, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. Thou hast been in Eden, the garden of Elohim. Every precious stone was thy covering, the sardis, topaz, and the diamond, the beryl, the onyx, and the jasper, and the sapphire, the emerald, and the carbuncle, and gold. The workmanship of thy tabrets and of thy pipes was prepared in thee the day that thou wast created. Thou art the anointed cherub that covereth, and I have set thee, so thou wast upon the holy mountain of Elohim. Thou hast walked up and down in the midst of the stones of fire. Thou wast perfect in thy ways from the day that thou wast created, till the iniquity was found in thee. By thy multitude of thy merchandise they have filled the midst of thee with violence, and thou hast sinned. Therefore I will cast thee as profane out of the mountain of Elohim, and I will destroy thee, O covering cherub, from the midst of the stones of fire. Thine heart was lifted up because of thy beauty, and thou hast corrupted thy wisdom by reason of thy brightness. I will cast thee to the ground, I will lay thee before kings, that they may behold upon thee. Thou hast defiled thy sanctuaries by the multitude of thy iniquities, by thy iniquity of thy traffic. Therefore will I bring forth a fire from the midst of thee. It shall devour thee, and I will bring thee to ashes upon the earth in the sight of all them that behold thee. All they know thee among the people shall be astonished at thee. Thou shalt be a terror, and shalt never thou be any more. So this is like a metaphorical speaking, but possibly also a blend of metaphorical speaking of this supernatural being, the anointed cherub, and also the actual king of Tyre, possibly. So that's what you have here, but it's plainly clear that the Garden of Eden was a mountain where there was fiery stone, so a volcano, the shield volcano Karajadog. And so for those of you who are into this type of stuff regarding the Mesopotamian writings, the Sumerian writings, here you have the Utu Shamash, the Mesopotamian sun god, right here with a handsaw in between peak mountains and a tree. So this is probably the anointed, this might be a type of the anointed cherub that covereth in their false belief system.
And upon editing it, it actually is, because the king of Tyre's name was Ithobaal, Baal, and Baal is also the sun god. So the correlation there between the king of Tyre, it's Baal, it's a Baal worship.
And here you can see that this is the location of the seal. We see this flat mountain heads that was likely flattened out, was already likely flattened. And you can see the flattened mountain heads of the Twin Peaks right here. And we can see this tree, possibly a tree of knowledge of good and evil. And here's another picture further out of that same location of the double Twin Peaks of Karajadog that I took. Here is another seal, more curved mountains. Look at this one. This mountain is taller. The one on the south is taller than the one on the north. And you can see something interesting. You have Utu Shamash here, this sun god, the Mesopotamian sun god again. And he has his foot on the mountain. And notice again that their mountains are made out of stone and one peak is higher than the other. Just like the picture says, you have one peak, this peak is shorter, this peak is higher, and here you have it. And Utu Shamash is possibly the anointed cherub that was covered of Ezekiel chapter 28, a metaphorical king of Tyre. And you can see the mountaintops, they're now radar, they've been leveled just a little bit for radar sites, but likely it looks like they're flat up there. Ezekiel chapter 28, verse 11, verse 13 through 14. Thou hast been in Eden, the garden of Elohim. Thou art the anointed cherub that covereth, and I have set thee. So thou wast upon the holy mountain of Elohim. Thou hast walked up and down in the midst of the stones of fire. And here you see his foot here walking on top of the mountain in the midst of the stone of fire. Utu Shamash might be, who is the Mesopotamian sun god, might be the anointed cherub that was covered. And covered in stones, but those stones don't mean anything unless light is going into those stones. And so, therefore, that covering, that light is going to be completely removed and be in darkness. So, therefore, that's why I say was covered in that, because it's pending. So, there you have that. That's likely, this is likely the location of all of this, and this is probably the correct interpretation and understanding of what's going on here with
Baal worship, sun worship.
this stuff. And here you can see it again, the double twin peak with this seal right here. So now the trees of the garden of Elohim in Ezekiel chapter 31, verse 8 through 9. The cedar trees, the fir trees, the chestnut trees, and miscellaneous trees of the garden. Ezekiel chapter 31, this is speaking of the fall like Assyria, speaking of behold the Assyrian. He was a cedar in Lebanon with fair branches and a shadowing shroud and of a high stature, and his top was among the thick boughs. So this person, this type of an antichrist figure, or this type of this adversary type figure, this Hasatan figure, he's tall and his high stature with fair branches like Lebanon. And you need to understand that there's like 3 different types of cedars, okay? You have the Taurus mountain cedars
Of Türkiye.
that are also in like Cyprus, and then you have the cedars of Lebanon, which are even taller and greater and more majestic. So here in this chapter, okay, it says that the waters made him great, speaking of the Assyrian, who was a cedar in Lebanon. So where he's at in Lebanon, the deep waters underneath probably the spring water set him on high, with her rivers running round about his plants, and sent out her little rivers unto the little trees of the field. Okay, this now might be talking about the Assyrian being on top of Karajadog. Therefore, his height was exalted above the trees of the field. Okay, and his boughs were multiplied. In cedar trees, they put out these majestic boughs, and his branches, so he became exalted, tall, and his branches became long because of the multitudes of waters when he shot forth his branches. Okay, so it means he's now going out in colonized areas, right? They sent out his peoples. All the fowls of heaven made their nests in his bow. So that's talking about the fowls are the nations, and it's talking about how they're having these type of like treaties or reciprocal relations or something like that, or maybe even paying duty to this Assyrian. Under his branches did all the beasts of the field bring forth their young, and under his shadow dwelt all the great nations. So he's the greatest nation of them all. Maybe Babylon. Maybe this is talking about Nebuchadnezzar, right? Because he was them all did that. Thus was he fair in his greatness, and in the length of his branches, for his root was by great waters. So this might be talking about the Nebuchadnezzar. The cedars in the garden of Elohim could not hide him. So that means that he grew up higher than the cedars that were in the garden. So he is the cedar of Lebanon, which is this majestic cedar, and he's growing higher than the cedars in the garden of Elohim, which are the Taurus mountain cedars. The fir trees were not like his boughs. So the fir trees stick out their branches, but the great majestic cedar of Lebanon has these huge, like, amazing looking branches and the fir trees couldn't compare. And the chestnut trees were not like his branches. So the chestnut trees has a lot of like leaves, so the chestnut trees weren't like it, nor any tree in the garden of Elohim was like unto him in his beauty. I've made him fair by the multitude of his branches,
So that all the trees of Eden
in the garden of Elohim envied. And I don't want to get that confused with Psalm 92, because in Psalm 92, the Psalm for the Sabbath day, it talks about the righteous shall grow as a palm tree. He shall flourish as a cedar in Lebanon. Was planted in the house of Yahweh in the courts of our Elohim, shall bear fruit in old age. They shall be fat and fresh. Now speaking of like a olive tree, to declare that Yahweh is upright, my rock, and in him is no evil. So being a cedar like Lebanon is a good thing if you have been planted in the house of Yahweh as a priest of his in the millennial reign. Okay, that's likely speaking about his Messiah, who is going to be a prince, ruler. And then there's the bad cedar of Lebanon as well, which was in the garden of Elohim. Okay, so
here you see the cedars in the garden, which would be like the Taurus cedars, considering Karajadog is in Türkiye. You have the fir trees, which are also native to Karajadog, the chestnut trees, and then these other trees. They're all in the Garden of Eden. These are the trees. So the Garden of Eden isn't this tropical-like place that people think about when you think of the Garden of Eden in the storybook pictures and everything else. It's cedar trees, fir trees, chestnut trees, and then other trees, all in the Garden of Eden.
Karajadog is a very desolate place. There are not many trees that remain. This area is a protected area right here, this area right here, and it contains a small patch of, I think, fir trees, and it is possibly a reforestation project, so here on the top. So maybe all the goats have gotten these trees, or just the pH of the soil might have changed over the years. I don't know. That location is right here. And then here we see a creek, a major creek system that heads out to the to the Tigris River eventually. And you see all of this green right here. So there's a lot of trees. So that would be interesting to see what type of trees are in there, if there could be a cedar tree left to explore that canyon right there, possibly. So this is another canyon, Muzavir Creek, just south of the other one. Look at all the green trees right here, just scattered with green trees. So this would not be a reforestation. This would likely be natural trees to the mountain. So that's something to consider. Now, this is a map of Türkiye, and this map is about the Taurus cedar. Not the cedar of Lebanon, but the Taurus cedar. And this is the modern distribution of the Taurus cedar. And there might be some of it by the Black Sea up here, but most of it is down here in the Taurus mountain range. And it's important to note, it's not that far from Karajadog. The Taurus mountain range would have came right here like this above the Karajadog, up here, and then where Diyarbakir is, and then come down and meet with the Zagros mountain range, which has the Persian cedar. So that is something to consider, that it's not far-fetched that this mountain Karajadog had many cedars on it, as described in Ezekiel chapter 31. And on a side note, there in the Epic of Gilgamesh, something that I don't subscribe to, as it's a Hamitic text, but it does, as I mentioned, it does contain some of the facts. Actually, it has preserved facts, same facts that we can see in the prophet's writings of Ezekiel 31, talks about there being a cedar forest. And here you see in the Epic of Gilgamesh, on this mythological mountain, is also a cedar forest. So if you want to know about how the cedar forest in the Epic of Gilgamesh, go with Karajadog, check out King Griffith, contact King Griffith about how he matched that up. So in the south, if some of the people might be saying, well, Nick, look at this mountain, this hill on Karajadog, around 1,800 meters in elevation, or maybe 1,700 meters in elevation. I don't know the elevation. I have to look back at it. It's on the southern slope. It's not necessarily on the top. And you're going to say, well, there's a lot of ancient stuff around here. This is more closer to where I identify Ham's city that he built for his wife. And this is a reforestation project on the southern slope. It's not saying, but while I was there at the side of the road, at the entrance to this site way down south, I took I don't know how many kilometers south, I took a picture of and documented that this was a reforestation project. Okay, so it is not, it's located down here, and that sign was right here. And the mountain of Diyarbakir probably starts right after that mountain, right up here is the top of the mountain. So that's just something to consider as well. So now I'm wrapping up this presentation. I want to talk about the possible former locations of the tree of life. And just for you to know, the tree of life is it begins with the fear of Yahweh. And the fear of Yahweh
is the beginning of wisdom and understanding.
So the tree of life it says in Proverbs, the tree of life is wisdom to all who find her. So it's actually, this has been hidden in the book of Genesis, but the tree of life is the tree of wisdom and understanding. As per the tree of knowledge of good and evil is the knowledge. So knowledge is different than wisdom and understanding. And the wisdom starts with the fear of Yahweh. With all your understanding, get wisdom. And the beginning of wisdom is the fear of Yahweh. The beginning of understanding is also the fear of Yahweh. So the tree of life is the tree of wisdom. And you can read all about it in Proverbs. And then, so I'm also going to give the former location of the tree of knowledge of good and evil on top of Karajadog. I have one in particular, but I'm also going to give two other proposals on the possible former locations of where they could have been. I believe that they were literal trees. Gary thinks he thinks that they were metaphorical speaking. In Genesis chapter 2, verse 9, it says, "And out of the ground Yahweh Elohim made to grow every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food, the tree of life, also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of knowledge of good and evil." So there's two trees, and the location is in the midst of the garden. Here you can see I measured the top of Karajadog. Right here is that mountain that stops right here. I said that this is about the start of it. You come all the way up here to up here, and I measured it. It's about 16 kilometers, 10 miles long. So Karajadog, that's the height. That's the length of Karajadog. So 16 divided by 2 is 8 kilometers, and 10 miles divided by 2 is 5 miles in, and that's right here. And this would be the middle of the garden if top of Karajadog is all the garden of Eden. And at that 8 kilometer, 5 mile mark is a location called Megmir. And Megmir in Turkey means tabletop, and it is it's a flat area. And notice that it's almost dead center, east side to west side. That Megmir is almost dead center as well. So not only is it north and south, it's also east to west, almost east to west. It's almost dead center as well. And this is a picture that I took of this area right here of Megmir. Here's another photo that I took on top of a hill looking down at Megmir. Right here, it's this grassy location. It's grass right here. And there is a well right here. And here's another picture that I took of it with the cloud cover on another day. And you can see it's very flat. In that previous picture, I was standing on top of this hill. So I want to wrap up this video. Revelation 2, verse 7. "He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches. To him that overcometh, Nikau is the Greek word, Nikau, will I give to eat of the tree of life, which is in the midst of the paradise, or midst of the garden of Elohim." Revelation chapter 22, verse 14, one of the most important verses in the book of Revelation, because it tells you how to get to enter into the city. Quote, "Blessed are they that do his commandments, that they may have right to the tree of life and may enter in through the gates into the city. So we are talking about the right to the tree of life. You have to do something. You have to keep his commandments. You've broken the commandments. You have to fear Yahweh Elohim for breaking his commandments, sinning against Yahweh Elohim, the eternal penalty that's on your soul, that if you were to be judged today for breaking that, which is an eternal punishment, fear that righteous judgment on your soul and admit that you've broken it, and then turn and keep the commandments and do his commandments and live. And you can now turn, because we have faith looking back at the sacrifice that was made for us, that was prophesied, that was a type of the vicarious atonement that would later come, the real covering of the blood of Messiah Yeshua that covers us, that covers our sin and atones for our sin and takes away our sin. The sin sacrifice. So there you have that. You have to do his 10 commandments and live. Keeping the Sabbath is of it. That's why I say Christians have to return to the Sabbath day. The Sabbath is a solar calibrated Sabbath according to the 364-day calendar, restored calendar. HallelwYAH. Proverbs chapter 3. Blessed is he who finds wisdom. Happy is the man that findeth wisdom, and the man that gaineth understanding. For the merchandise of it is better than the merchandise of silver, and the gain thereof than fine gold. She is more precious than rubies, and all the things that canst desire are not to be compared unto her. Length of days is in her right hand. Yod, Shin, Vav, Ayin. That is Yeshua's name. Length of days, that's eternal life. By trusting in the name of Yah is salvation. Yahusha, Yeshua for short in the Aramaic. Yod, Shin, Vav, Ayin. Okay? And in her left hand, riches and honor. Her ways are ways of pleasantness, and all her paths are peace. She, wisdom, is a tree of life to them that lay hold upon her. You have to lay hold upon her. You have to do something. You have to turn to her, repent, and keep her commandments through the faith of Messiah Yeshua. And happy is everyone that retaineth her. They're happy because they have eternal life. HallelwYAH. And here is me and my family on top of Karajadog, my blessed wife and our blessed children that we have. HallelwYAH. We are in the Garden of Eden. And all glory and praise to the name of Yahweh, my Elohim, who was gracious and merciful with me and did not enter into judgment with me when I was 23 years old, and I was guilty. But he gave me one last time to fear his pending righteous judgment on my soul, and allowed me to repent of my sin and claim the blood of his Son, and saved me from the penalty, the eternal penalty of my sin, and granted me my request for life, and to know him and his word, and who leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. HallelwYAH.